So in this session, we are going to talk about NMAT 2025 exam, and we will share our analysis with you. And this analysis has been created on the basis of feedback that we have got from numerous T.I.M.E students from across India. So let's get started with this. So the schedule of the exam was pretty much similar to how it was in the previous year. The examination got started on 5th of November and it will continue to be done till 19th of December. Last year, the end date was 20th of December. This year, they have made it 19th of December. So very much similar kind of test window has been kept. And NMAT exam can be written multiple times. They allow you to write this exam maximum 3 times. And as far as a number of attempts are concerned, they do allow it to be written 3 times. But as far as NMIMS goes, they will only accept the main attempt of NMAT. So if you are primarily writing NMAT exam for NMIMS, then it's advisable for you to write it only once, but give it your best shot. So that is about NMIMS. Now, as far as this particular exam is concerned, the pattern has not changed. It has remained absolutely the same pattern as was the case earlier. So NMAT 2025 pattern, it essentially had 108 questions, 36 questions in each of the sections. But the interesting point to keep in mind about NMAT is the duration that they assign for each of the section is different for different areas. As you can see on the screen, language skills or English would have the least amount of duration assigned. Only 28 minutes duration would be there. On the other hand, quantitative skills, that is nothing but mathematics, it will have 52 minutes assigned. That means anybody who is a little weaker in mathematics, for them it's an advantage because you are getting maximum duration assigned for this section. Logical reasoning, on the other hand, will be assigned 40 minutes of duration. Interestingly, NMAT allows you to select the order in which you want to attempt these sections. So this is a big advantage, isn't it? For example, if somebody is more comfortable with English, probably they would like to start with their stronger area. So you have the freedom to decide the order well in advance. So this is pattern of the exam. One more thing I want to highlight out here is this is a computer adaptive exam. So unlike all the other management entrance exams that you'll be writing, whether it is CAT or XAT or SNAP, etc., they're all computer-based tests, whereas this one is a computer adaptive exam. What is a computer adaptive exam? If you basically look at the way the exam is designed, the test engine will choose a question and it will give you a question based on your capability. So in a simple words, in a simple language, if you're solving questions correctly, the probability of the questions that are going to be given to you would be of much higher difficulty level than what you would get when you're solving questions incorrectly. This is in just layman's terms. Now, NMAT examination, if you look at the scores that you can secure in this exam, maximum possible score that you can secure in this particular exam would be 360, and the least possible score in this exam would be 36, 12, 12, 12, 36. So 36 could be the least, maximum could be 360. Now I'm going to talk about logical reasoning section. Then I'll hand it over to my colleagues who will take you through the quant and English language section. As far as logical reasoning section of this year's NMAT is concerned, the number of questions that have been given from critical reasoning is humongous. In fact, last year also, if you look at the NMAT exam, there also a good number of questions were from critical reasoning. From the feedback that we received from last year's student, there were around 15 or 16 questions based on critical reasoning. Whereas this year, the feedback that we have got from our students says that the number seems to be around 23. So the number of critical reasoning has seriously gone up. Now, this is where T.I.M.E students would have had an advantage, because if you are a student of T.I.M E, you would have been taught critical reasoning in absolutely in-depth manner, whether it is courses of action, whether it is assumptions, conclusions, all right, inferences, all those kind of questions were explained to you in detail. And if you had gained conceptual clarity, you would have found critical reasoning part of this section very much doable as such. Now, another interesting thing that we need to understand about this section is the length of the critical reasoning questions was on the higher side. So interestingly, even though it's a logical reasoning section, but your reading speed would have been a good differentiating factor. A person with a very good reading speed, that person would have been able to attempt far more number of questions than what a student with not so great speed would have been able to attempt. So that is another interesting thing to keep in mind about logical reasoning section. This was the breakup that we have got from our students based on memory. They were able to recreate this table for us. So as you can see on the screen, critical reasoning had 23 questions, and the breakup of these questions: conclusion based questions, there were two of them; inference based, there was one question; then 5 questions appeared from statements and assumptions. So statements and assumption was a pretty important area as far as this year's NMAT was concerned. Strengthening and weakening of arguments, 3 questions appeared. Statement and conclusion, 1 question was there. And of course, we had courses of action questions, 3 of them. Fact analysis, 1 question appeared. Statement and argument also had 3 questions. Now, analytical puzzles, different student had different type of puzzles. Somebody reported distribution based puzzle, somebody reported comparison based puzzle, but these were very much doable. The critical reasoning, majority of the questions, you can classify them as moderate to difficult questions, whereas the Venn diagram questions out here or the logical deductions questions out here, they were very much doable. The logical deductions question would have been very simple question to solve, provided you know the Venn diagram approach. So if you knew how to draw the basic diagram, alternative diagram, then it would have become very much doable for you. Input output, last year people had reported 2 sets, but this year students are reporting only 1 set of 4 questions. Some students got moderate kind of sets, some students have reported moderate to difficult kind of set as such. Ranking test, 1 question was there in this year exam according to the feedback that we have received. So overall, if you ask me about LR, I would say it was on the lines of moderate to difficult kind of a section. And people would have found time management to be a challenge because it was only 40 minutes of duration and the questions were on the lengthier side. So probably a good number of attempts would have been anything more than 25. So if you were able to attempt more than 25 confidently, it would be considered as good number of attempts. Having said that, it's advisable for you to, it would have been advisable for you to attempt all the questions, because if you leave questions unattempted, there would be a penalty for that. But considering the time allocated, it would have been a challenge to do that. Anything more than 25 number of attempts, we would say it was good performance from your side. So this was pertaining to logical reasoning. Now I'll hand it over to my colleague who will take you through the language skills section.
Hi guys. All right. So we've heard about the logical reasoning. Now we'll come to the language skills. Well, this was basically a runner's game. How fast can you read? The entire section depended on your skill, on how fast can I go, question after question, question after question. And even within the options, given that there are 5 options, given that there are 5 options, it makes it a little bit more challenging. All right. So I'll start with like I said, the moderate to difficult in terms of the questions themselves. If I would have said given you maybe 15 extra minutes, this probably would have been the easiest paper you've ever seen. But given the time constraint, 28 minutes, 36 questions, not even a minute to a question, reading the questions itself would have been a challenge. So I would categorize the difficulty as moderate to difficult. RC passages were pretty long for a section that only has 28 minutes and 36 questions. I would like to categorize the RCs as pretty long, though not very complicated in terms of the language. So no speed bumps, or not very complicated in terms of the ideas either. So it's easy to assimilate, but really, it's just can you run, can you read as fast as you can. The questions, though, I wouldn't categorize them particularly as very easy. There were some inference based questions within the RCs, not a lot of point and shoot like we see in some of the easier exams. So, yeah, RC passages were basically what made this whole section, end on the difficult side. Vocabulary really dominated the section. vocabulary and error identification really were the game changers. If you have a decent enough vocabulary, I'm not even saying that great vocabulary was required. Even if you had a decent enough vocabulary, this would have been a pretty easy section for you to cover ground as fast as you can to arrive at then the RCs, and maybe then you could have scored much better. All right, so that's the snapshot of the section. Let's see what the breakout is. All right, so reading comprehension, detail based. So 3 questions on detail based, about 3 odd questions on details pertaining to specific parts. Now, if you read the RCs and keep a track of the details while you're reading them, this would have been very fast to do. Global questions. Now, this is considering that there were quite a number of global questions. This would therefore require you to read the entire RC. You can't just point and shoot, right? So you have to understand the entire RC for that. And the number being high tells me that then it becomes a problem with time. How do I manage my time with the RC? Inference based, since a lot of the critical reasoning questions went to the LR section, not a lot in terms of inference. Even the ones that were there could be identified as parts of particular passages within the RC. Function based, very few. All right. Coming to the language skills, like the name of the section itself is language skills, and it showed. All right. So paraforming, which is 5 sentences, 4 sentences, not a lot of paraformation, so that makes your job a little easier. The few that were there, couple of options were tricky, but most of them were easy to eliminate. But yeah, you would always find yourself, given the constraint with time, this would be a little harder to crack. Not exactly straightforward, but then the language within these questions, not very complicated, so no speed bumps there. Error identification, again, this could have been challenging if you don't particularly focus on grammar. Might have been a little tricky here and there, a few tricky questions, a couple of them easy questions. Length of the question not really that great, I would say. So you could fairly cover the section pretty easily, but identifying the error itself might require a little bit of grammatical knowledge. Prepositions, again, part of grammar itself, but again, the length of the question not that great, but a little bit of prepositions is a tricky subject as is. So I would say, again, part of, since the number here is high, it is a tricky point. All right, sentence completion. So we had some analogies and sentence completion as well. Analogies were, if you were good and quick at scanning, this would have been very easy for you. So there were enough places in the section for you to run fast, depending on how good your skill is. So theoretically, it was possible to finish the 36. If I had to categorize, put it down to a number, I would say anything north of 26 would be a great attempt, with a 90% accuracy. So say 22 to 24. So answering the questions themselves maybe not that difficult, but just can you get to the next question was really the challenge here. All right, so I'll hand it over to my colleague who will take you through the quant section.
Hello, friends. So, unlike LR, what we've seen in the quant section, students did not report too many shocks or surprises, so to speak. It was mostly on predictable lines. The usual suspects, the same topics have returned, right? What students have noticed was there were a good number of questions from probability as well as permutation and combinations, a tad bit higher in probability, especially. And geometry and mensuration, once again, were conspicuous by their absence, just like last year. Now you could say that it could be in line with the broader decision taken by GMAT, right? Absence of geometry and mensuration, which they've completely done away with on the GMAT, right? DI, as expected, DI was calculation intensive. Everyone got 2 sets of DI, right? We'll look at that on the next slide. At least one of them was very calculation intensive. The second set was slightly difficult to comprehend, some students felt, but most others felt okay. They were both predictable and NMAT kind of DI sets, right? Let's look in a little more detail. In algebra and probability, this is how NMAT actually categorizes. So we've slightly rearranged the topics. For example, equations, quadratic equations comes in algebra, but simple equations we could be tempted to put under arithmetic, right? So algebra and probability, if you look at equations, progression, sequences, and series, and P&C probability, 5 questions from probability, which is a big deal, frankly, right? Now you could say algebra is getting more weightage thanks to whatever void was left by geometry and mensuration, right? And arithmetic, our favorite topic, every MBA aspirant's favorite area, right? Percentages, simple interest, compound interest, profit and loss, ratio proportion variation, time and work, and averages. That's a huge chunk of questions, and arithmetic remains the king of all MBA entrance exams, and the same we could see even in NMAT, as the same thing that we see every year in CAT, NMAT, XAT, and literally every other exam, right? Data sufficiency questions, most people got 4 to 5 questions, most people got about 4. DI caselets, everyone got one table or one caselet, and the other was either a pie chart, or a bar graph, or a stacked bar graph, or something like that, right? And a few questions from numbers. To round it off, one could say some of the questions were slightly lengthy, no doubt, but overall the flavor of the section remained intact, not too many surprises or anything like that. The same expected topics have come up, right? If you're good at data sufficiency, well, some questions there were particularly lengthy, some people have reported, right? We'll move on to the last part. Over to my colleague.
Thank you. So as far as cutoffs are concerned, these are merely expected cutoffs. The actual cutoffs can vary from these, but looking at the track record of business schools of the last few years, we have come up with this kind of list. So NMIMS, interestingly, last year NMIMS reduced the cutoffs. So earlier, NMIMS, different campuses had different cutoffs. NMIMS Mumbai used to have a very high cutoff, or northward of 230, in fact. Then Bangalore, then comes Hyderabad, Navi Mumbai, and it used to reduce. But last year, surprisingly, NMIMS decided to have a single cutoff for all their campuses. And last year, they kept it as 209 overall and 62 marks in every section. This year, again, we expect it to have similar kind of cutoffs. That's the reason I have mentioned it as around 210 marks. Now, T.I.M.E Manipal, we expect the cutoff to be around 220 marks. Then KJ Somaiya, we expect the cutoffs to be somewhere around 225 to 230. And finally, Xavier University Bhubaneswar, or XIMB, we expect it to be around 230 marks. Now, again, I want to reiterate, these are just the expected cutoffs that we have kept in place. The actual cutoffs may be different from these numbers. So, with this, we have come to the end of this session. I hope you got an idea about NMAT 2025 exam. If you haven't written the exam, from all of us here at T.I.M E, we wish you all the best, and you should do a good job. Thank you for attending this session.